We spend a lot of time on this deep dive talking about um, lines on maps.
Right. Borders, territory.
Yeah, who owns what, why the atlas looks the way it does. And usually we operate on a pretty simple assumption. A country is a country because it is one. It has a flag, an anthem, a seat at the UN.
It's the classic duck test. If it looks like a state, swims like a state, quacks like a state, it's a state.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's binary. You're either in the club or you're out. But today we are looking at a really high-tension geopolitical puzzle. Why does the world support self-determination in one region and completely reject it in another?
It really is one of the most revealing contradictions in modern geopolitics.
It is. We are looking at two places that completely break that duck test. Northern Cyprus in the Mediterranean and Somaliland in the Horn of Africa. If you traveled to either of these places, you'd feel like you were in a functioning country.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. They have police forces, traffic lights, tax systems, elected governments. But if you look at the official map of the world, the one hanging right now in the UN headquarters in New York, they effectively do not exist.
They're ghosts.
They are ghosts in the international machine, yes.
And that is a puzzle in itself. But the real reason we're diving into these specific sources today is because of the connection between them. There is one country that sits right in the middle of this contradiction. They hold two completely opposite positions at the exact same time.
And that country is Turkey.
Right. Because if I'm reading our research correctly, Turkey is the absolute only nation on earth that says Northern Cyprus is an independent country.
That's right.
They are all in. But then you pivot to Somaliland, which is arguably just as stable, maybe even more historically distinct, and Turkey says absolutely not. They are one of the loudest voices saying Somaliland must not be independent.
It looks like a massive double standard from the outside. I mean, in the Mediterranean, Turkey is the champion of the breakaway state. They defend the right of a minority to secede. But in East Africa, they are the champion of the central government.
Preaching the gospel of territorial integrity.
Exactly, refusing to let a state break away.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We are not here to decide who is right or wrong or who should get a country.
No, we are here to understand the machinery of international relations.
Right. How can you support one but not the other? Is it just hypocrisy, or is there a deeper strategic logic here?
Well, there is absolutely a logic, but to see it, you have to stop thinking like a human rights lawyer and start thinking like a state strategist. You have to look at how states actually behave.
Okay, let's look at the machinery then. Before we get into the specific histories of Somaliland and Cyprus, I think we need to establish the rules of the game. Most people assume there's a simple checklist, right?
Yeah.
Population, territory, government, boom, you're a state.
You're referring to the old Montevideo Convention of 1933. That's the classic definition. But in practice, clearly that's not enough. In the real world, you are dealing with two massive colliding forces in international law.
And what are those contenders?
In one corner, you have self-determination. This is rooted right in Article 1 of the UN Charter. It's the idea that a people, however you want to define that group, have the right to choose their own political destiny.
Which sounds incredibly democratic. Let the people decide.
In theory, it sounds great, but in the other corner, you have the reigning champion of the international system, which is territorial integrity.
The idea that borders are locked in.
Exactly. It's the principle that existing borders of UN member states cannot be changed unilaterally. Once a line is drawn, you can't move it without the permission of the state that already owns it.
So self-determination says, I have the right to leave. And territorial integrity says, you don't have the right to take the land with you.
That is the fundamental tension. And here is the harsh reality for anyone navigating global politics. Territorial integrity almost always wins. The international system is built by states for states.
And states hate losing land.
They are terrified of secession. Because if you allow it in one place, where does it stop?
Right, the Pandora's box fear. You open the lid, and suddenly every single province or region wants to be its own kingdom.
Precisely. So unless you have the explicit blessing of the parent state, or unless you have a superpower backing you with overwhelming military force, your right to independence is usually just theoretical.
Okay, so we have the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object. Let's apply this legal framework to our first case study, Somaliland. I feel like this region is a blind spot for a lot of people. When you hear Somalia, you probably think of instability, piracy, collapsed governments. But Somaliland is different.
It is night and day. And the history here is really crucial because Somaliland has a very specific legal argument that makes it unique. It's not just a random province trying to break away from a central government.
Break down that distinction for us.
It goes all the way back to the colonial era. The map of the Horn of Africa was drawn by Europeans. Somaliland was a British protectorate, British Somaliland. The rest of Somalia, the south, was an Italian colony.
So there were two completely different legal entities from the start.
Two different colonies, different administrators, different educational and legal systems. And here's the fact that always gets lost in the geopolitical shuffle. In 1960, Somaliland actually gained independence from Britain first.
Ooh, so it was a fully recognized sovereign state.
Yes. On June 26, 1960, the state of Somaliland became a fully independent nation. For 5 days, they were recognized by the United Kingdom, the United States, the United Nations. They had the whole package.
I had no idea. So they had their seat at the table, and then they gave it up.
They voluntarily united with the South. Italian Somalia gained its independence 5 days later, and they merged to form the Somali Republic.
Why would they do that?
It was the dream of pan-Somali unity, a greater Somalia. They wanted to bring all Somali people under one flag.
So it was a marriage. Two independent countries decided to become one.
Yes, but the marriage was a disaster. The cultural and administrative differences between the British-influenced North and the Italian-influenced South were massive. And eventually, this led to the brutal dictatorship of Siad Barre in Mogadishu.
And this is where things turn incredibly violent.
Yes. The dictatorship in the South systematically oppressed the North. By the late 1980s, the Somali Air Force was literally bombing Somaliland's cities. Hargeisa, the capital of Somaliland, was leveled.
So this wasn't just political disagreement. This was a fight for survival.
Exactly. So in 1991, when the central government in Mogadishu finally collapsed, leading to the total chaos we saw on the news in the 90s, Somaliland didn't say, "We are declaring a brand new independence."
What did they say?
They said, "This union has failed. We are dissolving the marriage and reverting to our 1960 status."
That is a fascinating legal argument. They aren't asking for new borders. They're asking for their old borders back.
Right. They're saying the divorce is final. And since 1991, they have actually walked the walk. They have their own governing, their own currency, security forces. They hold democratic elections with peaceful transfers of power.
Which is incredibly rare for that region.
It is. If you look at the functional criteria for statehood, Somaliland checks every single box. They are a stable state.
But they aren't a state on paper. The map hasn't changed.
No, it hasn't.
And this brings us right back to Turkey, because Turkey has become a massive player in Somalia over the last decade. You see Turkish companies running the port, Turkish airlines flying into Mogadishu.
Turkey is arguably the biggest external stakeholder in Somalia right now. They've built hospitals, schools, and their largest overseas military base, Turksum, is right there in Mogadishu. It is a cornerstone of Turkey's Africa strategy.
And yet, their stance on Somaliland is what?
One Somalia. Turkey explicitly rejects the recognition of Somaliland. They advocate for dialogue, they act as mediators, but the absolute premise is always reunification or some kind of federal system. They will not entertain separation.
So even though Somaliland has this 1960 independent state argument and the on-the-ground stability argument, Turkey heavily defends the territorial integrity of the central government.
They are strict defenders of the map as it stands. In this case, territorial integrity wins.
Okay, hold that picture in your mind. A stable, democratic region wants to restore its old independence, and Turkey says no. Now, let's pivot north to the Mediterranean, to Cyprus.
Where the script gets entirely flipped.
Let's set the scene here, because unlike Somaliland, which was a voluntary union that went bad, Cyprus feels like a forced roommate situation right from the start.
That is a very accurate way to frame it. Cyprus has a deep, complex history of ethnic tension between the Greek Cypriot majority and the Turkish Cypriot minority. The turning point really happens in 1974.
What triggered it?
A military coup. The junta in Greece backed a coup in Cyprus with the specific goal of enosis.
Enosis meaning union with Greece.
Exactly. And this was viewed as an existential threat to the Turkish Cypriots on the island. They feared ethnic cleansing.
And Turkey did not just sit back and watch.
No. Turkey launched a massive military intervention in 1974. They invoked their status as a guarantor power under the 1960 treaty that established Cyprus.
So their argument was, this wasn't an invasion, it was a rescue mission.
Legally, Ankara called it a peace operation, but the result of that intervention was the physical division of the island. The north became a Turkish-controlled zone, and the south remained the internationally recognized Republic of Cyprus.
And eventually, the north officially declares independence.
Yes, in 1983, they declared the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, the TRNC.
But unlike Somaliland, which has literally zero recognition, Northern Cyprus has exactly one.
Just one.
Hmm.
Turkey. To the rest of the world, the UN, the EU, the United States, the TRNC does not exist. It is considered part of the Republic of Cyprus under illegal military occupation.
Okay, let's look at the scorecard here. In Somaliland, Turkey says we cannot recognize you because it violates the territorial integrity of Somalia. In Cyprus, Turkey says we recognize you, and we are ignoring the territorial integrity of the Republic of Cyprus.
It is a glaring inconsistency.
How does Turkey justify this? Because diplomats are usually pretty good at spinning these things. What is their official, elite legal argument for the difference?
The Turkish defense relies heavily on the concept of co-founders. They argue that the original Republic of Cyprus was formed by two equal partners, Greeks and Turks. Supporters of this view argue that when the Greek side tried to unite with Greece in 74, they broke the constitutional order.
So the Turkish Cypriots aren't seceding from a legitimate state, they are surviving the collapse of one.
Exactly. They frame the TRNC as a necessary structure for physical security and political equality. It's a protection of rights, not just a land grab. Whereas with Somaliland, critics in Ankara view that as a unilateral breakaway from a recognized sovereign state.
Even with Somaliland's 1960 history.
Yes, they choose to interpret that 1960 union in Somalia as a permanent, binding contract.
It feels like heavy legal gymnastics.
It is, but that is what international law often becomes at this level, a vocabulary you use to justify strategic choices.
Which brings us to the real meat of this analysis, the realist shift. Because states don't actually make decisions based on moral consistency, do they? They make them based on strategic interests. Law follows strategy.
Always. If we strip away the legal terminology, the strategic reality becomes crystal clear. Let's look at Turkey's geopolitical calculations in the Mediterranean first. Have you encountered the term blue homeland?
Mavi Vatan, right.
It sounds poetic, but I assume it's about hard power.
It is entirely about maritime dominance. Turkey views the Eastern Mediterranean as vital to its national security. There are huge natural gas reserves there, critical shipping lanes.
And where does Northern Cyprus fit into that?
Northern Cyprus is essentially an unsinkable aircraft carrier parked 40 miles off Turkey's southern coast.
So recognizing the TRNC isn't just about protecting Turkish Cypriots. It secures a massive strategic asset for Ankara. Exactly. It guarantees Turkey a foothold in the energy and security game of the Mediterranean. Analysts suggest that if Turkey abandoned Northern Cyprus to a unified Greek-dominated government, Ankara would feel strategically encircled. It's a matter of national defense.
Okay, that makes perfect sense for the yes in the Mediterranean. Yeah. But what is the strategic logic for the no in Africa? Why not recognize Somaliland? They are stable, they are friendly to foreign investment. Wouldn't Turkey want another ally in the region?
You would think so, but the grand prize in the Horn of Africa isn't Hargeisa, the capital of Somaliland. It's Mogadishu.
The gateway to the Indian Ocean.
Exactly. Turkey has spent years positioning itself as a major diplomatic and economic partner to the central government in Mogadishu. They have a massive market there.
So recognition is just a political tool.
Entirely. If Turkey recognized Somaliland, they would instantly damage their relationship with Somalia. They would lose their airbase, their port deals, their standing in the region.
And it goes beyond just Somalia, doesn't it? Because we have to talk about the continental context, the African Union.
This is deeply important. You cannot understand African geopolitics without understanding the African Union's absolute obsession with territorial integrity.
Right, because of the colonial legacy.
Exactly. Most African borders were drawn arbitrarily by European powers. They cut right through ethnic groups. They combined historical rivals. When these nations gained independence in the 1960s, African leaders faced a terrifying dilemma.
Do we try to fix the map or do we keep it?
Right. And they realized that if they allowed borders to change to reflect actual realities on the ground, like recognizing a Somaliland, it could trigger a domino effect of fragmentation across the entire continent.
It's that Pandora's box fear again.
Yeah.
If Somaliland gets to leave, what about Biafra in Nigeria? What about regions in the Congo?
Exactly. It would risk endless continental war. So the AU has this strict unwritten rule. We defend the existing borders, no matter how little sense they make on the ground.
So for a country like Turkey, who is trying to build a massive diplomatic and economic presence across all of Africa selling drones, building infrastructure, going against the AU's golden rule would be a disaster.
It would alienate them from the entire continent. So in Africa, consistency takes a backseat to diplomacy. They advocate for dialogue and unity because that keeps them in the good graces of the AU.
It is incredibly ruthless, But it is completely rational.
That is the essence of realpolitik. Consistency is less important than strategic positioning.
But I want to zoom out for a second, because we're focusing heavily on Turkey. But this isn't just a Turkish phenomenon, is it? This kind of global double standard.
Oh, not at all. Turkey is just our lens today. But selective recognition is a global pattern. Inconsistency is the norm.
Give us some quick examples.
Look at Kosovo. The United States and many Western allies recognize Kosovo's independence from Serbia.
But Spain doesn't.
Spain fiercely refuses to recognize Kosovo. Why? Because they are terrified of setting a precedent for Catalonia or the Basque region. Their foreign policy is dictated by domestic fears of secession.
Or look at Taiwan.
A perfect example. Taiwan is a highly functional, democratic economic powerhouse. But it lacks widespread official recognition because the geopolitical cost of angering China is simply too high for most states.
And we see similar recognition puzzles with Palestine, Western Sahara, South Sudan.
In every single one of these cases, recognition is a political decision. It is influenced by alliances, security interests, and trade. It is not an automatic legal outcome. States apply these principles very selectively.
It really shatters the illusion of international law, doesn't it? We want to believe there is a judge sitting somewhere checking a scorecard saying, congratulations, you've met the criteria, you are now a state.
But there isn't. You can build a functioning democracy, you can issue passports, you can keep the peace. But if recognizing you threatens the strategic interests of the major powers in your neighborhood, you will remain a ghost state.
Which leaves us with a really deep tension to wrap up this deep dive. We've seen how history, regional fears, and strategic interests create this world where two remarkably similar situations, Somaliland and Northern Cyprus, are treated completely differently.
It all comes down to competing histories and competing interests.
Right. And it leaves you wondering, as we look at the future of geopolitics, does international law actually guide global politics at all? Or do politics and raw power simply shape how the law is interpreted?
That is the ultimate question.
And as we move into an era where maybe physical borders matter less, where digital states or corporate entities might start wielding state-like power, will this rigid system of recognition finally break? Or will the states in power just invent new legal vocabulary to protect their interests?
They usually find a way to adapt the rules to protect the status quo.
Something for all of you to mull over as you look at the world map tonight. There are no simple rights and wrongs here, just interests. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.